Our guest on the show today is Dr. Amanda Cole from Australia.
I write art music for instruments, and I also compose electronic music. My compositions often combine acoustic instruments and electronic music. I've made my own instruments, and sometimes I do computer programming for art gallery installations, or I work collaboratively with visual artists and programmers, etc.
That sounds like a dream come true.
Well, yeah, it's quite fun. I enjoy what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. How many different instruments have you made? Like, what kinds of instruments do you enjoy making?
So the main instrument I've made, or instruments, have been made from wine glasses. So, of course, everything I compose, I want it to be microtonal. That's my area of interest. And I love the sound of microtonal music. So with wine glasses, you can tune them to any frequency. So my first microtonal glass harmonica had 60 wine glasses, and it was tuned to 2 octaves of Harry Partch's 29 note to the octave scale. So that's a colour-coded instrument. So there's different subscales within Partch's scale that I was using to compose with. So that's an acoustic instrument. Requires 3 percussionists to play. My more recent glass instrument has got contact mics on the wine glasses that go into my computer running max MSP, and that triggers more microtonal frequencies from the glasses timbre, and also triggers coloured lighting.
So does the glass harmonica consist of simply many wine glasses, or is it a different kind of instrument? Because I've seen those instruments that are like a spinning bowl that's a little bit wet and you just put your finger on it. Like there was that viral video with like some Mozart piece where somebody was using that. Is it like one of those where it's turning, or is it just a lot of wine glasses on a table?
It's a lot of wine glasses. So they all came from IKEA. And my dream was that, there's an IKEA in every country, that percussionists I just send them the type of glass and they go out and, make their own to my specifications, which has not happened because percussionists just look at that and they think, oh, what a hassle. But it's, so mine is actually 60 separate wine glasses that you'd use at a dinner table, so stock standard wine glasses, and they're stuck down to a Perspex board. It's actually 3 separate instruments that make up the scale. So there's 29 notes in each octave, which is basically 30 notes if you include the octave. And there's 2 octaves, so that's 60 notes, and I just divide that into thirds. So each percussionist gets a third of the scale, and they have their separate instrument that's got 1 row of 10 glasses and a second row of 10 glasses. So that's in front of each percussionist.
Yeah. So are these notes, they're a subset of Harry Partch's Genesis scale then?
Yeah, so it's not the full 43 notes. So with the 29 note scale, it's made from the first 11 harmonics in the harmonic series. So it's basically all the intervals you can make with the first 11 harmonics in the harmonic series, which gives you 29 notes. So the 43 note scale, as you probably know, has some big gaps at the beginning and the end of the scale. It's a symmetrical scale. So he basically plugs those gaps with the extra notes. So in my wine glass instrument, I'm not plugging those gaps. I'm just using just the intervals made from the first 11 harmonics.
Oh, wow. And so does that then only come out to 29 notes if you don't plug the gaps? Oh, I didn't know that. I guess I thought there were way less gaps or something.
No, there's a few gaps here and there that get plugged. So, yeah, he just does that, picks notes which are, within the interval that needs plugging, and then it's really just whichever ones he wanted that sounded, good. And it's a symmetrical scale, so it's, even at each end and everything. But, and then I colour code his scale. So there's each harmonic, has its own colour. So there's like an orange, the colour orange is the 11th harmonic. So I put coloured food dye into the water of the glasses to colour code the instrument. And that's very helpful for the percussionist because they can navigate this really unfamiliar scale quite easily with my scores that are color-coded. So really all they need to know is you're playing the orange scale now and there's 6 notes. And so on my scale, my scores are always really for classically trained percussionists who are used to playing, typical, 20th century repertoire. So I just try and write it all out, as though it's normal notation, but I can color code, have 6 different lines. So from the lowest orange glass to the highest orange glass. And then it's just really having all different combinations of the different colours. So there's like a red and yellow section, then there'll be a green and blue section, and that just makes all these different subscales within carving up those 29 notes of the whole scale.
A good way to get people to read that, for sure. So do you include any ratios in the scores at all, or is it just the colours to look at?
Just the colours. So at the beginning of the score, if I'm sending the score to someone potentially to hopefully perform where I'm not there, all the ratios and the tuning information comes with the score. But in the score itself, no, they're just 6 different notes, and it just says orange or it says yellow, or you don't even have to color code it, but I like to do that because it's, I like colors and it's pretty. And yeah,
color coding is definitely a really common microtonal approach, and it's almost like every person does it differently. I like yours. It's like a combination of a lot of really good color coding strategies where you have something that's easy to look at, and then you also have the different colors corresponding to different scales of some kind. So the glass harmonica that you're talking about with the colors, is that the one that we're hearing in Cirrus?
Yes, and that was the first sort of big piece I wrote for that instrument.
Right. So how many pieces have you written for it since?
5 since, and then I think the last one, it was actually just a score with blocks of colour where the percussionist could improvise. So I went from it being completely notated to it being quite free, and then adding in sine tones with the chords that the percussionist is playing and things. So
yeah, so you're sort of exploring the full range of like the performance practice of that instrument in theory.
Yeah, and also it's quite the lowest note is C. So I've kind of set like middle C. So with the sine tones, I've got I can go into the deeper registers because I haven't built like a really low glass instrument yet. So that was sort of filling out the range as well and using the same frequencies, but an octave or 2 lower.
Yeah, I was wondering about the range because every time I've tried something with a wine glass, it's been like, I can't really get a good amount of notes out of it. So are your wine glasses very large, like abnormally large, or are they just a normal size?
There are some oversized wine glasses, but they're you can buy them at IKEA. They're not like specially custom made or anything. Right. So yeah, if I go into the glassware section of IKEA, I can get a bit excited if I see a new glass that they didn't used to have or something. But no, they're all pretty standard. I can't remember exactly, but I think you only get about, maybe it's a major third or something out of each glass, the range, and then you've got to move to the next type of glass. And luckily I was able to get 10 glasses and get the notes I needed in each range. So visually it looks like, each set of 10 glasses is the same type of glass. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's very neat and tidy.
Yeah, that was just lucky though, So
how do you use the sine waves and harmonica together? What pops into my head when you say that is something like, where an opera singer is singing a really high note and they're resonating a glass and then it shatters. Like, do you try and use the sine waves to make the glasses vibrate at all, or?
No, that's a nice idea. I haven't tried that yet, using like sympathetic vibrations and things like that. I did see an Alvin Lucier piece once where it was amazing, where a cellist played, the lowest note to the highest note on their instrument, and there's all these vases around the stage, and they all vibrated, when it got to that certain frequency. But no, I haven't done anything like that. It's more that it's sort of about timbre matching, like the sound of the wine glasses when they're played almost has a sine tone like frequency. I mean, you'll probably notice quite a few sine tones in a lot of my pieces. I just love sine tones. I love the idea that it's a pure tone, but I also just love listening to sine tones. And also I find sine tones just blend with whatever timbre you put them with generally. They just sort of meld in, as opposed to if you're using another electronic timbre, then it's more noticeable, or they almost just disappear into the texture when you use a sine tone.
Yeah, they're very They're very useful for a lot of different things. And so then that's part of your logo then, because you have this excellent logo with like the sine waves and then the different colors in. Does that come from your like harmonica color coding and love of sine tones?
It's more about love of sine tones and specifically interference beats. So my sister's a graphic designer, so I actually kind of did a bit of a sketch and she was able to do the logo for me, which was handy. But, yeah, those colours are just chosen really by my sister, who's a graphic designer. They weren't specifically from anything. There are some diagrams on my website of screen captures of sine tone interference beats. So where I'm quite into, you know, making a certain tempo, like crotchet equals 60, and they're getting two sine tones like A440 and A444 and putting them together on two different tracks in some software like Logic or Pro Tools or whatever, and then you put them on a combined track, and then you just see, you know, you see the sine tone beats there, and you can cut
the 4.
Yeah, 4 per second, and then you can just trim those and cut those up and sequence those, and just make like, you know, little rhythmic compositions with sine tone interference beats. And I just love the look of them on the screen, but also just that you can, once you have them there, you can start moving them around and making compositions with those.
Do you combine interference beats in very complex ways sometimes? Do you cut things up almost always to generate that material? It seems like a really intuitive way to like get interference beats of certain tempos.
When I first heard microtonal music, one of the things I loved about it was all the interference beats that you got. So I went to Microfest 2001 in Los Angeles, and when I just had graduated from my undergraduate degree in Sydney, and there was a teacher who was really into microtonal music who got me into it, and we went over with a small group of students, and there was Craig Grady playing, and he had this microtonal vibraphone, and when he was playing, I was just like, wow, that's like the best thing I've seen in my whole life. And then just all these harmonics, all the beating, you know, harmonics were just crazy. Like they were louder than his actual notes he was playing on the vibraphone. The whole room was just this, you know, sort of these clouds of beating notes, and I just like, wow, I love that. So I love interference beats, and I started trying to make my own out of sine tones. So in my piece Vibraphone Theories, and that's the first piece I really tried to like use beating sine tones as an accompaniment actually. So I realised I could, you know, make these sine tones and chop them up. And I love rhythmic structures too, so I love polyrhythms and metric modulations, and I try and really slow those down, but I'm really I love mechanical things like that. So, so I made a whole accompaniment out of the sine tone interference beats. And so I think they're just like bits, and they change. They go through a sequence of chords, and they're all in polyrhythms. And then the vibraphone plays a part on top of that. And the sine tones, they're slightly lower than A440. And because I started with A440, and then I would put -4 hertz and make that, and then I didn't realise it actually takes, it takes the average frequency of the two notes, so it went down, 2 hertz or whatever. So and often I've been told by percussionists that vibraphones are usually not really exactly the same; they're always just a little bit different. So but it's so clinical using sine tones, which I love too. So, so when you put the two things together, when they play the same note in the live performance, and you've got to get the mix right, but it just sets off this whole other thing of, interference beats between the beating sine tones and the vibraphone. And, but then that throws out, the accompaniment for the percussionist. So the piece has to be performed with a click track. So they always have a click track so they can, otherwise they have no hope of following, beating sine tones that are being with other layers that are being destroyed by more beating. So
you would say that you don't mind that each vibraphone is a little bit different, got slightly different tuning or timbre or whatever?
Definitely, yeah, and the timbre, interacts with the sine tones in different ways, and I mean, it's basically the same piece, but it'd be slightly different each time with the timbre and tuning of the vibraphone.
Do you know how much the sine tones deviate from 12th tone equal temperament in general?
Which ones? The ones in that piece or in...
Yeah. I was wondering, because I thought I heard some notes being flat, but you know how the ear likes to play tricks on you, and when you have like a sine tone that's an octave versus a stretched octave, like my ear likes to make the stretched octave seem like it's the real one, and the octave like it's not.
Well, they're tuned to A440 exactly, but say there's an A, then to make 4 beats per second, I would use a 336, like a minus the 4 hertz, and then when you put the two notes together, you go down. Your ear hears the average of the two. So I suppose it's all down by it's the sine tone part is lower than A440 in various, depending on what the beats are. So
you get that kind of like a little like flat.
Yeah, it's a bit flat. Yeah. At the time I didn't even realise that was happening. But now when I do my sine tone beats, I make an average of around the actual frequency. I think about the resulting frequency that I'm getting, and I plan it more on that. Yeah.
So is there a point where the beating changes? Because I think maybe it is something like 15 hertz, or maybe it's logarithmic, where if you take two sine waves that are close and they start getting farther apart, there's like this point where you start to hear two different sine waves. Is that something you use in your compositions at all with sine waves?
No. So once I hit about 15 hertz, that's it, because I just want that clean differentiation between it's either beating or it's separate. So, and often 15, beats per second's pretty, that's a lot of, that's almost a hard rhythm to hear. So, I try and keep it close enough to make really obvious beats. And then I don't really play around with that sort of critical bandwidth or that area where it's kind of that rough sensation of tone and then, the separation of the notes. But, maybe in the future, maybe you've given me an idea there. I'm not sure.
I mean, I'm just throwing out ideas that I have heard of and how they're related to like this potential idea and what that could mean and stuff like that. Another thing that pops into my head is just how you could have some sine tones interacting, but you could have more than two sine tones interacting in potentially complex ways. And maybe if your sine tones were separated by something like an octave or a perfect fifth, you could make like some polyrhythmic patterns that could potentially be pretty complex. But I wouldn't know. I don't really know the math behind that, so I don't know if you are interested in combination tones and difference tones. I don't know how those work.
I am interested in those. I did hear, I don't know who it was by, but I heard a piece years ago where an electronic music piece, and it was by a female composer somewhere, I think they were from New York, and it was just, it just made your ears do these crazy things, like you were listening to notes, and then there was all these other notes going, and I'd love to investigate that further. I just haven't done that yet. Yeah,
and what was the name of the Lucier piece?
Oh, I'm not sure. But it was cello and vases, so...
It's like, that's, that orchestration, you're not going to find that anywhere else, right?
No, it was just, it was an amazing piece.
So, with Node, how did you go about figuring out the best trills between microtones? There are several points in the score where you have a note and then you have a note a microtone higher and the player is trilling.
Okay, so this piece was written for a friend of mine called Janet McKay, and she did her PhD recital in flute, and she asked me to write her this piece. So I was working on this piece very closely with her, with the fingering, so I think it's probably the only way to do this is to actually work with someone playing that instrument. So I started off thinking I could just get the fingerings off. There's a website, it's the University of New South Wales Music Physics Department in Sydney has a website where there's just hundreds, if not thousands, of fingerings. You can type in like B and a certain amount of sense deviation and it'll give you all these fingerings. And I thought, simple, I'll just choose those. But
that website sounds amazing. What's that called?
So it's the University of New South Wales Music Physics Department. and they have a whole department that looks at enharmonic fingerings for woodwind instruments, and it's a resource where you can just type in, it will give you B and it'll give you 200 fingerings, and it gives you the deviation of each note in cents and the fingerings.
Oh my God! Time to move to Australia.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, I haven't even been down and met the people who have made that, but that's on my list too, because it's actually right near where I live. Yeah. Anyway, so I thought I could just do it off that, but it became apparent that physically getting between one fingering and another fingering quickly, like with a trill, it's really like you've got to, there's a physicality to it. The flute player just has to have. Janet had sort through the options I gave her as a starting point and show me, oh no, I can't quickly move from that to that, but I could just go like this. So, maybe if you didn't have access to a flautist, you could make a flute to scale out of paper or something and sit there yourself and try and see how hard it would be to move between the fingerings or something. But I was lucky enough that Janet was really just saying, do this and that, and I can't do that one. And so she put a lot of time into it to come up with the fingerings that are supplied with the score. I assume that they're the easiest fingerings for the notes I want. She found the piece really difficult to play. In her recital, she ended up only playing the first movement, not the second one, because it was just too much work to do too. So that shows how hard it is, because it was for her, it was a PhD recital. So that's made me think too, in the future with this type of piece, I would try and limit it to not as many notes in the one piece. So maybe just concentrate on a subset of the notes, or there's a bit of commitment. She said it was like learning a new instrument, because, obviously they learn fingerings when you learn the flute, and she's an incredible flautist, but just learning weird fingerings, it's just completely that's a whole different thing. So you really need to find players that are prepared to have a passion or interest in microtonal notes, to put the work in and have the passion to do, I guess, the type of music I'm writing. Or else I'm also interested in just having, a flautist who has a mild interest in, doing microtones and just making it easy for them. I don't want to make things too hard. So I'm always looking at ways that I can make something more accessible or just easier to play.
Right, yeah. That's always a great idea with microtones. Yeah, those I'll bet those weird fingerings would definitely be hard to learn. It's interesting how in some cases with microtonal instruments, it's like the way that musicians memorize patterns and repetitions. Like some musicians don't, I think, discriminate between 12-tone equal temperament and other tunings as much. Like I'm like that with my weird pianos that I like, that have different numbers of notes in between the octaves. But then I think some people, a lot of their knowledge of how they play music comes from the peculiarity of the interface, and then if that changes, it's like everything's wrong.
Yeah.
So another thing about Node that I noticed that was interesting, in Movement 2, actually Movement 2 is the only one you sent me, right? Is that the only one that was performed?
Oh, maybe that's why. I can't remember which one it was. Possibly 2. Or did I send you the audio recording as well, didn't I? So I'm not sure which one.
Yeah, you sent me Movement 2, so I didn't know if it had multiple performances. Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, there's this cool part that happens in it. Oh, yeah. Right at rehearsal D, there is this moment where you have a bar in 15/8, and it seems like it's kind of like, you know how like a major scale just goes up and down and it's all the same rhythm, but then you have your microtonal notes such that by the time you get to the top, you don't have a C anymore. So, is that like an intentional parody of C major?
No, but that's an interesting take on it. So, basically, with this piece, I laid out all of the harmonics, that you get on the C and G strings on a cello.
Mm-hmm.
And then but just the first 16 harmonics. So obviously, the 16th harmonic occurs, 16 times compared with the third harmonic, etc. There's 2 places on the string where that is. So, so you get all these arpeggios and scalic passages with that. So I basically was just taking bits and pieces of what I had, the overall scale, and just using those as little motives to develop into different sections of this piece of music. So there must have been a little scale section like that. Where, yeah, you're right, I could have gone up to the C, and that would have made it more like a C scale, but I didn't for some reason there. Perhaps it didn't have the C at the top or something.
Yeah, it has a B natural with an arrow down, but your naturals are filled in with a black color. Is that, I guess I haven't decoded your accidental system yet. Hold on.
Yeah, so that's the other thing. I mean, really, you know, I was kind of had to make up my own system a bit there. I mean, with microtonal music, there's not really a locked down system, you know, with the accidentals. So different composers do it different ways. So I had to I made a few of my own accidentals. And, so there's an explanation at the front of the score, and it's just really about how many cents deviation they are away from the note, the closest note on the piano. So the filled in,
I see.
Yeah, so there's like minus 14 cents if it's a filled in, minus 12 cents is a filled in natural if it's pointing downwards. So I tried to make it as logical as possible, but that's, I guess, maybe another composer's made that easier to read, I'm not sure.
Well, I think what's happened is there have been many composers that have created notations for just intonation and equal temperaments, and then ideas on the internet have kind of like collided into different things. So I think what people are using for just intonation now is Helmholtz-Ellis notation, although I've also met some fierce advocates of Ben Johnston's notation. The important difference being that Helmholtz-Ellis notation assumes that the naturals are just Pythagorean tuning, which is more logical, but can sometimes be harder for musicians, depending on who you are and how you like to think of chords. And then in Ben Johnston's notation, the justly tuned diatonic scale from C is the thing with no accidentals. So logically inconsistent, but helpful sometimes in spelling triads.
Yeah, I probably could look more further at what other composers have done with their accidentals. So I just kind of, you know, used some of the more obvious ones like back to front flats and things like that, and then just modified them myself.
Because the accidentals are just so difficult, is that generally why they're placed above the notes?
Yeah, I just thought it looked a bit neater. I think I had them in the score and there was a lot going on visually. So it seemed to just be a place where they could just be, and that's just really an aesthetic thing to sort of make it easy to read.
Yeah, I think that's consistent. In fact, you could, well, I don't know, I guess if you had chords, you could just stack the accidentals on top of each other, but, or maybe you could even stack them left to right, because that would be, like, more efficient space-wise. I'm just thinking about all these situations where, like, you try and put a microtonal accidental in the score, and you know, basically, if it's not Dorico or a very tech-savvy program, you might have to make your own symbol and put it there and then, like, move everything over, and the things might collide. And, yeah, so are you using Sibelius or Finale, or...
I've used Finale for, you know, years and years, and I'm reluctant to go over to any other program because I'm just so used to Finale. But, yeah, I had to do all that make your own symbol, and actually, I hadn't even thought of the idea of having chords. It would be a nightmare. I mean, flute has one note at a time, or in my score it does. So, I'd really have to sort of think that one through, definitely. That would be accidental chaos there, wouldn't it, with all weird sharps and flats just going everywhere. Yeah.
Not only keeping track of it, but also, like, making sure the program doesn't collide things that it doesn't think are accidentals. This is usually about the time in the show that I plug Dorico because it's so awesome and I bought it. Dorico, if you've heard of the notation software,
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it has built-in native microtonal playback with all of the logical accidentals you could ever want. In fact, I think the accidentals you've designed, I've seen symbols for those in, like, the default fonts Dorico gives. So I didn't have to download anything. I didn't have to, like, hack together 5 programs just to get something simple to happen. Playback, notation, it's all there.
You sold me on that because, I was doing a lot of, like, DIY, you know. Right. Yeah, it was a very laborious process to, like, you know, it's like making an artwork doing that because it's, you've got to, anyway. And you can't play it back either in Finale. Well, I don't think you can. I haven't worked that out, but...
You can, but it's very, very, very hard. And I hadn't cracked it. I hadn't figured out how to beat finale with that. But I did figure out, like, what I did for microtonal accidentals in finale was, you have like 10 accidentals where you can replace the accidentals with the fonts. So I would usually do that. And then before I knew how to do that, I was using the expression tool and just grabbing like the Maestro percussion, like microtonal accidental, and just moving it to the side of the note, and then making sure that nothing was colliding.
And then it moves, you're like, no, don't move, and yeah.
That's literally it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we learned a little bit about Node. Let's talk about Ecliptica now, then. So it's this really cool string piece where you use freeze pedals. Is that what those are called? Yeah. How did you use those to manipulate the sounds of the string quartet? I hear some static sounds in there that I can't quite explain. So
yeah, okay. So a string quartet asked me to write a piece, and then they said we've got these freeze pedals, and I was like, oh, what's that? And apparently, what happens is you play a note, and whatever you're playing at that particular moment when your foot presses this pedal, it sustains, so it just catches that note and just draws it out. So every instrument in the string quartet had a freeze pedal, and so the whole piece is completely rhythmically locked down, and it's got polyrhythms and polymetric structures and all sorts of things. But generally, the musicians are allowed to choose whatever natural harmonic they want from the four strings. So in the first part of the piece, they have to pitch a natural harmonic and freeze it basically, but they're using click tracks again. So even though it's super rigid with its rhythmic structures, on the surface it sounds like it might be a free composition or kind of rhythmically free, but it's actually kind of got, because when you play a harmonic, or you might move your hand doing a harmonic glissando later in the piece or something, but you have to move it in a certain rhythm. But what you get is this sort of spray of maybe harmonics that are completely indeterminate sounding. But so the first part's just catching those natural harmonics and these sort of polymetric structures and freezing those. And then there's a bit where it's string crossing, and that's completely rhythmic, have to be in time with the click track. And they freely move their four fingers up and down the strings to get natural harmonics, but they're doing string crossing.
Oh, I think I heard that at about like a minute and 25 in. Is that where that would start happening?
Yeah, that's what happens.
Yeah, I hear these high harmonics that sound really alien, so they're doing that during that.
Yeah, so they're just like, I got them initially to turn the violins around like cellos, but they could just do it holding the violin in a normal way, just lightly had all four fingers on doing a natural harmonic glissando whilst doing string crossing.
Huh, and are you trying to get any kind of specific, like, sort of chord out of that? Well, since it changes over the length of the violin, yeah, you're just doing that. Okay, and they're doing that in time.
So I'd say all the pitch in the whole piece, the pitches are indeterminate, but they have to be natural harmonics from the four strings. But rhythmically, there's no negotiation. It's all locked down. So I'll send you the score for that one sometime, so you can see that what's going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. It definitely is the opposite of what I thought rhythmically was going on.
You thought it was quite free or something. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, on the surface it really just sounds so free. It's like really not. But I like that. I like that. Yeah. But that's how it's made.
Yeah. Let's see. I have one of these other questions here. When lower notes suddenly exit at around 3 minutes, I start to notice higher microtonal pitches that aren't harmonics.
So the only equal-tempered notes that come through are the ones with the open strings. So that's just like C, G, D, A, and E. So it's a pentatonic scale, I guess. Now what I could have done is probably, and even if the piece is performed again, I could get them to tune the strings in just fifths. But, for what, it was just standard. Actually, I think I mentioned that to them. I'm not sure if they did that or not. But so it's basically, they can play the open notes, but they're the only equal-tempered notes. Everything else has to be a natural harmonic from those 5 fundamental frequencies or those strings. So in that section you're talking about, they're actually allowed to play either the open strings or the harmonics, but they can do extended techniques. Like they can do a little bow bounce, like a jet A thing, or they could do like a tremolo or something, but they've got, where the note that has to happen, so they can choose the pitch and choose the technique in that section that you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So they have the techniques that they can use, and then are the techniques themselves improvisational at all?
Yes, yeah. So, but it had to be a technique where you could hear the pitch. So they're not like tapping the instrument. There's no percussive things allowed. It was just kind of like, what can you do to change the timbre of the harmonic or the open string, but still hear the note?
Yeah. Is there any Cole Legno?
Yeah, back of the bow. I think there was a bit of that. Yeah, some of the best string players in Sydney, really, really good players. So, I was lucky with that. Yeah.
I think I am actually going to have to go soon, but I did want to ask you if there were any projects around the corner or artists or anything you want to promote on the podcast, like your promo.
Oh, okay. I don't actually have any upcoming events at the moment. I'm really just in the middle of working on a few pieces. But what I'm really working on, I've been doing microtonal choir pieces for a few years with a visual artist where we sonify live star data, and we have a choir where they have an app and they hear their microtonal note in their ear, and it depends what star's going over the horizon, and they sing that note. So I've been doing those with a visual artist called Microtallic and a programmer called Warren Armstrong, but as a sort of side project, I'm writing out some fully notated microtonal choir pieces, and still I'm going to use, render out each part that's set this time, and they hear their note and then they sing. So they're quite droney kind of, I haven't tried doing any sort of jumpy rhythms. I do want to try that eventually, and I'm really interested in at the moment in vowel sounds and the different harmonics you can sing with vowel sounds. I suppose it's getting into the area of a bit of throat singing, but more just changing the timbre of a held note with classical singers just changing vowels and things like that. So that's an area I'm really interested in. I'm wanting to do some more string work, so I'm going to write a string orchestra piece using lots of natural harmonics and scordatura to change the strings into getting some more just intonation tuning going. And yeah, that's really what I'm working on right now. So I'm doing a lot of research and meeting with musicians and finding opportunities for those pieces to be potentially performed.
The microtonal choir projects are very exciting. It's come up a lot in the podcast lately, actually, because Warren Burt described how he did that piece with tuning forks. He'd have each choir member had a tuning fork. And then we're having Toby Twining on in December to talk about his Chrysalid Requiem, which is one of the more famous microtonal choir pieces as well. So I guess it seems like the microtonal choir idea is really taking off. Yeah,
I love Warren Burt's tuning forks. They're amazing. Microtonal choir is great because really, it's hard if they have to try and read notation, but if they have a reference, like in Warren Burt's one with the tuning forks, I'm not sure how the second composer was doing it, but that you mentioned, but even just listening to a tone, they can sing anything, so and you can get some quite beautiful sounds. I think there's a lot of scope there for microtonal choir. I'm really into that. I look forward to hearing those other composers pieces on your podcast. That sounds great.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast. We really appreciate you being on. Of course, we'll promote you on social media and all that good stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. That was really great to chat about all those pieces and to see your keyboard, etc. And yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you very much.